Welcome to the 242 Next Steps podcast. Our mission is to help people take next steps with God. We believe everyone has a next step. What's yours? And now your host, Jim Damon.
Hello and welcome to the 242 Next Steps podcast. I'm your host, Jim Damon, and on today's episode, we're going to get an in-depth and personal look at what it means to leave a life of comfort for a calling into the unknown. Here to share his personal story is 242 Ann Arbor campus pastor, Derek Alonzi. Derek, thank you for coming onto the podcast and for being open to share the intimate details on how you find yourself in ministry today.
Jim, man, thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan and just an honor to be here and share a little bit of my story.
I noticed that you're wearing a U of M hat. Is there any reason for that? Are you an avid U of M fan or?
Absolutely, and I'm very competitive, so it's always great to be associated with the winningest program in college football history.
I love it. My father went to U of M, and so our house bleeds maize and blue as well, so we have that in common. That's great. You know, many of our listeners would say at some point in their lives, they've wondered about their personal life calling. You know, maybe they've asked themselves questions like, is this it for me, or am I made for something more or different? I know that I've done that. And Derek, your story involves a move from a life of maybe comfort to a called life of a Christian mission. Why is that story an important one to share on something like a podcast?
Yeah, I think it's really important to share because it empowers others to see that just because the last 10 to 50 years they haven't been doing God's direct work, that they can do it in any capacity, whether that be the church, the marketplace, the schools, their neighborhoods. Ministry is so much more than just working at a church. It is seeing that calling as something that God can use your time and your talents.
Yeah. Today's episode is going to provide our listener with an example of following that dream, that urge, that little voice inside your head, and where we can end up when we allow the possibilities of life to open up. And I'm excited to hear more. So why don't we get right into it, Derek? Sound good?
Absolutely. Yes, do it.
Awesome. All right. So let's open this time together with you sharing more of that story. We've kind of alluded to the fact that you had an occupation, kind of a life that maybe felt comfortable. Start us there. Where were you at when this story begins?
Well, as I was just thinking a little bit about this, real briefly, I was not that kid growing up that knew exactly what I wanted to be when I was an adult. And my wife was and still is. So there's always been a little bit of jealousy there. But I remember sitting in my guidance counselor's office in high school, junior year, and they said, "What are you going to do?" It's like, I don't know. I'm just loving high school, just loving life right now. And that set me on a journey because that guidance counselor was a believer. He was a Christ follower, to explore different areas. So yeah, right out of high school, I went to Bible college online, just trying to learn and soak up as much information as I could, not knowing if I was going to go into vocational church ministry, be a missionary. And I also went to community college as well. And that was a key point for me because that guidance counselor encouraged me to kind of diversify my learning, not just do one thing. And I know that's your story as well, Jim, is you don't have to just have a degree in biblical studies or ministry, but that you can offer the world something. I think about a guy like Paul in the Bible. He built tents and he provided a service to people, and then he spread the gospel. So, fast forward to a couple of years later, I had a bachelor's degree in business, and then I had my Bible college degree. My wife and I got invited to this church called 242 as they were opening up in the Ann Arbor area. And we sat in the back row for a few months. Then we became volunteers. Then we started apprenticing in a small group, took some leadership classes. And over that 2-year journey, I thought, well, man, maybe God's calling me, or maybe I would just really love to do this more. And so came on staff part-time in the student department, and that was another 2-year process. So one thing I'd want the listeners to know is that you might want to be somewhere. You might feel called to do something, but that God's going to take you on a journey, and that journey is more important than the destination.
That's good. I can imagine along the way that there have been times where maybe you've had voices, thoughts in your head that made you hesitate in your decision to jump into ministry, to take some of those next steps? What ultimately made you override those, I don't know, whether they were insecurities or doubts or even the cons of when you're weighing the pros and cons there? What was it that made you override those?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it's leaving a legacy. It's being proud of the work that I do. And I used to work in a bank, and it wasn't a bad job. It was making money for our shareholders. It was taking care of our customers and our clients. It was really good work. And I did a lot of ministry in that place as being a really good example, as much as I could, to my coworkers, not freaking out when something came down from corporate, not slandering, talking poorly of coworkers. If you're listening to this right now and you're working a job that you're not especially passionate about, you can take that work and you can make it worship to God by living out your faith and showing your coworkers there's something more to just punching in and punching out. But
sure,
yeah, those hesitations, those voices that crept in were, you're not cut out for this. You're like, how's your family going to eat? You're working for a nonprofit, for a church. I know quite a few pastors who plan to work till they die because you're not always able to set aside money to retire.
Yeah.
And so those hesitations around the comfort, I know when you're opening right there about moving from comfort, that was a huge part for me because I was more comfortable worldly, but I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't always excited to get up and go to work, and that's different now. I'm just excited all the time to go to work.
You mentioned the worldly comfort. I'm curious because you mentioned your wife, and I know that you probably have family and friends who have given input into your life and decisions as well. When it came to start to make the decision about maybe moving away from this job in the banking industry, What were other people saying? Were there doubts? Were there other sort of worldly comforts that they brought to mind that they wanted you to be mindful of? Was it full support? Was it hesitation? Tell me about the other people in your life.
Yeah. When I made this jump into full-time vocational ministry, it was 2013, so 7 years ago. Actually, I think 7 years ago next month, and people thinking about, like, you went to school, you spent this money, you have this degree, you're just going into your career, you've moved up a little bit, and there's potential to do far more climbing of said corporate ladder. And it was just people wanting me to take a step back. For those out there who know me, I like to jump in with both feet. And so family and friends had seen me jump in with both feet to many things and not finish strong. So this is an area of my life I feel very proud that I've had some consistency. But yeah.
And probably within those 7 years, those people that wanted you to really evaluate this, change from where you were at in the banking industry, they've had an opportunity to kind of see you grow and probably have a different opinion now, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've actually several coworkers who now attend 242 locations, and since there are 7 of them, they're all across Michigan. It's cool to get occasional texts from previous coworkers that I saw you on the social media, or I really love this message from this teaching pastor, or I'm a part of the Ann Arbor community. We have a really awesome community center that's normally in use, and so to get to see coworkers who come in during the week or on the weekends with their families is always really cool. So one thing that was a big help for me was that I felt like God said is you can always go back. You can always go back. Mm-hmm. There's the only thing that there's just so many banks, right? There's so many of whatever industry. And for those who are listening right now, it's a pretty good chance that if you try this and you fail, or you're not called, or it was just for a specific season in your life, you can always go back. And you might have to start a couple rungs lower on the corporate ladder. But for me, it was that assurance that I wasn't burning any bridges. I wasn't leaving poorly.
Sure.
I could always crawl back and get another job if this wasn't what I was called to do.
That's good. I like that. I'm sure people listening have had moments where they've said, what if? what if I did take this leap? What if I did try to pursue this calling? What would you say that your experience has given you to share with those fellow dreamers?
Yeah. Oh, definitely dreamers. I would say embark on the journey. I know I said that earlier, but when I look back, I'm thankful that God took me on a journey and that it wasn't some mountaintop and I was 100% sure, and then I called up my boss and I quit the next day, and it's been sunshine and rainbows, and it's been everything I've dreamed of since. But that kind of these 2-year chunks, we were attending, volunteering, leading for 2 years. Then I was part-time, more involved with the church for another 2 years. I was bivocational, as we call it. Had a full-time job, and I was also working with our student ministry in the early days of Ann Arbor for 10 to 15 hours a week. So it was a lot to manage, but it was a really good way to see, is this something that I'm excited, something that I am called to? And then making the leap into full-time ministry. So I would say go on a journey. And one thing that I absolutely love about this church, 242, is that you have the ability to take a next step and not be fully committed with your income. You could say, hey, I want to be around the student ministry. I want to be around the small group department a little bit more. And you could give a couple hours a week and shadow and apprentice some of our staff. I love the idea that Jesus called 12 men who most likely flunked out of their religious system and went back and learned what their parents did. They learned their craft. Many of them were fishermen, or some were tax collectors, and they were called to quote-unquote ministry later in life, where they were not the kind of people you think would be rabbis and teachers and would go out and change the world. So,
with any decision that we make in life, the opportunity to have regrets can creep in. So I'm going to ask that question, Derek. Any regrets looking back? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, none that I can think of, none that are really glaring, other than just personality flaws of myself, just jumping in, saying yes to too many things. And if you are embarking on a journey towards your calling, you might be tempted to say yes to every good thing that comes along. And then you get down a path and you realize, wow, I'm doing a bunch of things mediocre at best. And so I would say, if you're going to take a next step in and you're dreaming, you're looking for your purpose, just try one thing and mark it with a season. Say, hey, for the next 6 months, I'm going to commit to working with our amazing kids ministry, or I'm going to partner with this homeless shelter or something. And I'm going to do that for 6 months, and I'm going to invite somebody to hold me accountable to that, to have a coach. Maybe it's somebody in your small group, maybe it's a mentor, maybe even a friend, and say, hey, could we get together once a month and you check in on this thing that I'm dreaming about? Because we get really excited on the front end of things, but we don't always finish well or debrief or circle back to see, was I really called to that? And what I found myself and others is you can get discouraged. You can get to a place where you think, I've tried 4 or 5 different things. Maybe I just don't have a calling. Maybe I'm just a log floating through life, and all these other people know what they're called to do and meant to do, and I just haven't found mine, or maybe I just don't have one. And I think that's definitely a lie. Every single person is called to do ministry in some way, shape, and form. So that's what I would say. Try something for 6 months and have somebody coach you along the way.
That's awesome. That's good. As you talk about the fact that sometimes we may feel listless, we may feel that we're just kind of floating around, looking for our calling. One of the things that I've been aware of, especially now that I've been working from home a little bit more and maybe on social media a little bit more to see what's going on in the world, is it looks like a lot of people have achieved their calling and are just living their best life on social media. And yet I somehow suspect that that's not always the case. Is that something you've seen as well, Derek, that it just looks like everybody is achieving their calling when you look at social media right now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's... I said it earlier, even in the podcast, I had to catch myself. I'm not 100% excited about doing my job all the time. That's even exaggeration right there. There's some parts of our jobs that are tedious and boring, but you do the things you have to do so you can do the things you want to do. And I think understanding that some people might be just a few steps further along in understanding that. So social media can definitely affect that a lot. And that's why I think a coach is good. Somebody who knows you, who's grounded in their faith, who can speak truth to you and tell you that you're not as far behind as you might feel.
In other words, stop looking at Facebook, people. Stop looking at social media to find out if everybody else is living their calling out, and get busy working on yours. That's
good. Take the 5 hours a week that you scroll, or the 50 hours a week that you scroll, and go watch some YouTube videos about what you want to be passionate about, or go serve at a nonprofit. Oh my gosh, here's the one thing. If there's something you're passionate about, and I know we've talked about ministry, and I want people to know that vocational church ministry, being a pastor, working weekend services or small groups, that is just one sliver of God's ministry and around the world. So if you called up a nonprofit, a Christian counseling center, and said, hey, I just want to volunteer, what can I do to help? Call up Meals on Wheels, or working with adults with special needs, or whatever you are passionate about. Calling up a couple nonprofits and saying, hey, I can give 10 hours a week from home, come to the office, pass out flyers, whatever you need. Just go do something.
I love that. So that's a good tip. What is the thing right now that you would say makes this calling so worth it? Which, maybe another way to say that is, what is your favorite thing about this journey that you've found yourself at right now?
Yeah. We had a question last night with our small group, and it was, what's a skill or a trait that you have that God can use? And for me, something I'd like to pride myself on is I love to find people who need to be believed in, that they have so much more to offer than they think. And that's because people did that to me. They said, you can do more than you think you can. And we're going to walk with you. We're going to help you. We're going to give you some options and check in on you. And so that's something that I love about this job is it is all people. It is people who are struggling. It's people who are excited. It's everything in between. And you get a chance to speak life and speak truth to people, and hopefully encourage and inspire them to be the men and women that God has designed them to be. So that's something I love about this job, empowering people.
Awesome. All right, so say I'm the listener that's ready to be called from my own comfort. Maybe you've convinced that person. Give that person the next step, the thing that they have to do today to start the process and realizing their calling.
Yeah, one next step. I'm going to throw out a couple here. First one is pray. Just take some time. If I'm not much of a journaler, but when I was making some big life decisions, my coach said, you need to take all those thoughts, all those things that are swirling around in your brain, all of the peeking over the fence and saying that person's grass is greener, that person's life must be better. If I could only be Jim Damon, campus pastor and podcast host at 242, then my life would be the bee's knees. It would be so amazing. Stop comparing yourself. get a little journal and start writing some of those thoughts down. Go on a journey with God and with somebody else, and explore. Second one would be do some research. So pray, do some research, try some things out. There's some really cool tests out there about your spiritual gifts or your spiritual pathways. Those are some good resources. Just start exploring and invite somebody in. Invite a coach in to walk with you.
There you go. Pray and do your research. Yeah. I've got those written down as practical next steps. Derek, I want to thank you for allowing us to have a glimpse into your life and your choice to follow your personal calling. And if I can just share with our audience that your story resonates with me. You've alluded a little bit to this, but my story is also one of being called from a seemingly set career. I was a special education teacher for 17 years, and I thought that was what I was going to do until I retired before entering into vocational ministry. In fact, Derek, I remember that you sat on the interview committee that hired me. Any chance that you saw a little bit of yourself and me in that interview?
Oh, Jim, I tried to hire you in Ann Arbor. I tried to get you down here, if you don't remember.
That's true. You wanted me to move right down to the Wolverine Den, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. You're a special guy, and what you bring to this 242 team is thoroughness, an attention to detail, and the flip side of that is you're extremely pastoral. You really care about people, and you really care about the community. So if anybody's listening to this podcast who lives up in the Bay City area, Jim has been a huge behind the scenes and out front guy and serving that community during this terrible flood. So Jim, just want to say thank you for everything you're doing, leading that community.
Yeah, thank you so much. You make it easy to want to live out this calling, Derek, so thank you. I also want to thank you, the listener, for tuning in on this journey with us at the 242 Next Steps podcast. Check back next week for a new episode, a new topic, and a new guest.
Thank you for joining us on today's podcast. If you like what you just listened to or know someone who would, be sure to check out more great content from wherever you stream your podcasts. Simply search 242 Next Steps podcast.
Hey, listener, we wanted to bring you a little bonus talk today, a little extra conversation between Derek Alonzi and myself. Derek mentioned in the podcast starting to attend a church and spend some time just kind of taking it all in. And Derek's not the first guest on the podcast to mention moving from sort of a passive participant to an active entity within the church. And so I wanted Derek to just chat a little bit more about that. Derek, are you game for that?
Oh, yeah, you know it.
Awesome.
So
you kind of went from, and I think you said with your wife at the same time, kind of went from just checking out 242, being at a church, kind of sitting in the back row, to slowly starting to take what we would call next steps at the church. Walk us through how that started and why that became an important thing for you.
Oh, my gosh, so important. So a coworker actually invited us to the church and invited me, and my wife got an invitation on campus kind of the same time. And so we went the second week of the church's launch and not knowing what to expect. I mean, it was a portable church in a hotel. They set up and tore down in a hotel ballroom. And so trying to see, did the values of this church align with the things that we valued about following Jesus? And so also sitting in the back row, knowing that we had some things in our life we had to get in order as a young couple. But it was people who pursued us, actually, people who are on staff to this day who said, "Hey, will you come serve the kids?" They made the serve so palatable, so easy. Just, hey, can you give one service every other week in the nursery, and then for my wife, and then for me serving with elementary kids. I never saw myself doing that, but I really loved it, leading a small group of elementary boys, and it's something I look forward to. And then another time, somebody said, "Hey, would you help us tear this thing down?" Sure, you need my help? Would love to help. And so just people inviting us on the journey, people inviting us to give our time and really seeing us. That was huge. Not just seeing us as consumers of a service, but that this community could use our help. That was huge. So, and then the last step there as we were moving along is somebody said, "Hey, you guys would be good small group leaders. You should come and come learn from our small group." And that was a couple that lived in the Saline area. And so we apprenticed them for a few months, and then they launched us off and we went and started our very first small group. So the beauty about 242 and churches like it is you're taking next steps before you know it, because people are encouraging you. They're seeing something in you and they're inviting you to something tangible. So.
Yeah. So I just wrap that conversation up. Let's speak to somebody who is, just maybe getting into the church situation. They're not involved. They're checking something out. Maybe they're doing what we would call dating a church situation. What is that one thing that you would tell them to do, to step out and to be bold with in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. A church like 242, there's this thing called Step 1. It's a great class just to learn a little bit more. That's more informational. But I would say reach out and ask to talk to a pastor. Hey, I want to learn more. I want to know more. See if there's a spot for me here, and start a conversation. One thing I've loved about this community is it's not just information, it's relationships and conversation that people, they don't want you to just come and sit and consume a service, but they want you to be a part of it. So if you're feeling that unrest, or that there's something more for you, there probably is.
That's awesome. Thanks for answering that.